Thank you for joining Gwinnett County Public Library for our Exploring Latine Women Authors in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. My name is Miriam Mayer, and I am an Adult Services Specialist for Gwinnett County Public Library. Tonight, we are joined by multimedia storyteller Sandra Guzmán, who will be in conversation with our moderator, writer Anjanette Delgado, discussing the new book, Daughters of Latin America, an international anthology of writing by Latine women. Now I would like to introduce our guest speakers for tonight. Anjanette Delgado was born in Puerto Rico and writes about heartbreak, displacement, and social justice. She is the award-winning author of the novels The Heartbreak Pill and The Clairvoyant of Calle Ocho. She has written for the New York Times Modern Love column, Vogue, HBO, among others. Anjanette holds an MFA in creative writing from Florida International University and lives in Miami, Florida, where she is working on her third novel. Sandra Guzmán is an award-winning feminist writer and documentary filmmaker. She was a producer of The Pieces I Am, a critically acclaimed film about the art and life of her literary mentor, Toni Morrison. She is the author of the nonfiction book, The New Latinas Bible. Her work explores identity, land, memory, race, sexuality, spirituality, culture, and gender. She was editor of Latina in Heart and Soul magazines. Her work has appeared on HBO, NBC News, CNN, Audubon, Univision, Telemundo, El Diario La Prensa, and PBS, among other media outlets. Please welcome Sandra Guzmán and Anjanette Delgado.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think I'm going to shorten my bio.
Yeah.
I first want to say that I am coming to you live from Exeter, New Hampshire, and New Hampshire is the ancestral land of the Abenaki people. I like to begin my talks with recognizing the indigenous land on which I am living. I am a guest, and acknowledge that they are living among us. So it's such a profound pleasure to be in conversation with you, my beautiful Anjanette.
Oh, same here, Sandra. And fully the energy connects with everybody who's listening, with everybody who made time to come and listen and, to talk about books and about women's writings. What could be better? So I want to start by asking you, what kind of wonderful substance were you under when you decided to accept editing a book with over 100 authors? I think 140.
Yeah.
140. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of pages. And I believe you did it in under 2 years, and we were in a pandemic. What possessed you is, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
That is a great question. What possessed me are writers like yourself. First of all, this anthology has a sister anthology, and it's New Daughters of Africa, which, do you have it? I have it. I'll show it in a little bit.
I don't have it here with me, but I do have it. It's fantastic. I reviewed it.
So you know that New Daughters of Africa is about 1,000 pages. It's 906 pages, and it has 210 daughters of Africa around the world. And so it's a great ancestor anthology to be inspired by. And also, there are other anthologies that inspired me. The Native American anthology edited by Joy Harjo.
Mm-hmm.
When the light of the world is subdued, our songs came shining through, which is a fantastic collection of Native American writings. And This Bridge Called My Back, edited by Gloria Anzaldúa and Cherie Moraga. So these are ancestor anthologies that I was inspired by. And specifically to Daughters of Latin America, I wanted to include as many daughters as I could between the covers of the book. I had 500 pages to play with, and thousands of women who have inspired me, who have illuminated us, in many different kinds of languages, cultures, genres. So this anthology, I think, is just on the tip of the iceberg when it comes to talent.
Oh, you're so sweet. But I can imagine you trying to choose from among all these hundreds and hundreds of women and only having 500 pages, right? I was thinking of it before as it's many pages, but when you mention and we think about all the countries that you had to include and all the wonderful writing by women, by the feminine, right? All everybody. Wow. I mean, now it's not. There's not enough. You need more pages.
Yeah.
I want and as you speak about that, I want to hear about your vision in this particular from this particular perspective. As you know, I've also edited an anthology. I think as you were starting to edit yours, I was starting to edit Home in Florida, which was about Latinx writers and the literature of uprootedness, right, of being from somewhere else. And there were many things that I found that were new to me. It was my first anthology. And so you have a vision at the beginning, and then at the end, you realize what percentage of that vision you were actually able to make happen, right? And you start lofty, and then you adapt. And then the writers come in and help you kind of do it. I was wondering if had been like that for you, to kind of bring us a little bit into your process. Once you closed that contract and you said, okay, I got to get to work.
Yeah.
What did that look like?
Yeah. Well, I want to shout out Tracy Sherrod, who used to be the head of Amistad Books. And I remember calling her and wanting to have a conversation about her vision for the book. I mean, she acquired the book, and editors have ideas. And I remember she said to me, I don't know, it's your anthology. You do what you want with it. And could you imagine an editor telling you, yeah, you do what you want? So that gave me wings to really dream and dream big. But there were certain things that I really wanted to make sure that a mission and a vision and intentionality that drove me through the process. So I knew for sure, being a daughter of Borican, being an Afro-Indigenous daughter of Borican, I am deeply rooted in Indigenous and African storytelling. And this is literature, oral literature, that is thousands and thousands and thousands years old. And this is how all the stories survived. So I always knew going in that this kind of literature had to be uplifted in the anthology. You know, as the Black women of Puerto Rico and the Indigenous women of Puerto Rico who raised me, I needed to make sure that the kind of storytelling that I grew up with, which I consider literature, right, had to be uplifted. So that was very much a part of the intentionality. And then when I heard a statistic that really just gutted me years ago during a conversation with an elder who mentioned to me that every 12 to 14 days, an Indigenous language dies around the world. And that, according to some people, the language dies, and some people say the language is murdered, right? It depends on the lens. And languages are disappearing because the state does not teach them, does not respect them, does not promote them. So I wanted to figure out who were the poets and who were the writers who were still writing in their ancestor tongues and their mother tongues in the Americas, because I also read a fantastic interview, which I ended up putting in the anthology. It's a conversation between Carla Sanchez and Jasnaya Aguilar. And it's really beautiful because they're talking about Jasnaya, who's a linguist, Mije from Oaxaca, Indigenous linguist. And she's the one that I quote when I say Indigenous languages are not, they don't disappear, they're murdered. There's an actual murder of these languages. So I read this interview, and in the interview, I learned that in Mexico alone, you can speak an Indigenous language 365 days of the year without ever speaking Spanish or English or French or Dutch, Portuguese, any of the colonizer languages. And I was just like, yes, let me investigate, who are these women? And so that was another pillar, right? To find the Indigenous women and to lift their stories and their storytelling styles. They're very different. Mapuche is very different than a woman from Nicaragua, the Miskito community, from the Owa community, from the Boricua community, from the Zapoteca community. So that was just a wonderful, I fell into so many rabbit holes researching. I mean, this is work of a lot of scholarship and really conversation. And so those were two communities that I was sure I wanted to lift. And then another very intentional decision to seek out queer Latine writers, because we know that queer women in the Americas have had to leave their countries of origin because of fascist regimes, have had to stay in the closet and live in the closet throughout their entire lives. I mean, I'm thinking of Gabriela Mistral, whom everybody, in contemporary Chile and Latin America, they would say que era una jamona, she was bitter, she wore these ugly shoes. And they would criticize her, and she was having the time of her life. She had a lot of lovers. In fact, she met this Boricua called Connie, and she was teaching at Middlebury, and Connie went back to Puerto Rico. And you know who went to teach at the University of Puerto Rico? Gabriela Mistral, following the beautiful Connie. And so I started to read letters, and I thought the letters were they're so beautifully intimate. It's such a beautiful kind of literature. And so I went with letters for Gabriela and for another poet, Julia de Burgos, and a couple of other poets. So anyway, so the queer women of the Americas had to be absolutely lifted, because they do write under incredible pressure. And then the fourth intentionality of the anthology was to lift Puerto Rican women writers, because I don't need to explain to you, we are a colony. We were invaded by Spain in 1493. And then in 1898, we were invaded by the United States. And so we are in this liminal political space. And when literary anthologies are curated in the United States, they usually don't think of Ana Lidia Vega, Anjanette Delgado, Esmeralda Santiago. We're often left out of the literary conversation in the United States. And then when anthologies are edited in Latin America, the confusion starts. You're not really part of Latin America, you're part of the United States, and we're clearly part of Latin America. And so I felt it was very important for me to lift, as a Boricua, as a Puerto Rican woman, it was very important to lift my sisters. So those were four pillars that held up, the anthology. And then from there, I started to build, right? From there, I started to build. And I also, one of the things that I was very clear about is that when we think of Latin America, we think of only the Spanish-speaking nations, right? And so those are imperialistic definitions and superficial borders that separate us, and that are really not true on the ground, because Edwidge Danticat, for instance, has been an inspiration to so many of us, right? So she's clearly Latin America. Maris Condé, Audre Lorde. I mean, I could go on and on about all the Caribbean women who, somos antillanas, they're part of our history, and women from Trinidad, and women from Jamaica, and women from Guyana. And so, these, I thought about all my sisters, right? In the regions of the world that are not usually defined as part of Latin America. Brazil, come on, Brazil, come on. And so
right.
The borders.
Well, I was going to say, I've often gotten in trouble because say, you can be Hispanic anywhere, right? You were born in a Spanish speaking country and you're Hispanic, but you're only Latino in the modern sense here, because what we are, Latinos in the US, right, are people with a common history of colonization. And when I say a common history of colonization, I'm talking religion, I'm talking language, I'm talking a lot of things, living a common experience in the United States at this time in history. And when you think of Latino, right, you're not thinking of the Latin, Roman, whatever. You're not thinking of that. You're thinking of these people that have something in common but are not the same.
Yeah.
And that's, those shared, that shared history unites us. So I totally get what you're saying. And I wanted to also say, Sandra, as a reader, I love so many writers. I love Isabel Allende. I love many writers, but I really appreciate as a reader having access. When people talk about diversity, they think we are only talking about Black people or about Latino people. No, you included a wide cross section. Obviously, white women writers were, incredible allies as well, who had their own struggles that shared with Black and Indigenous women. But I'm sure, you know, and I haven't asked her, but I'm sure if you ask Isabel would rather have her space ceded to an Indigenous woman who is invisible, who's been made invisible by history, than to have a piece of her writing published in yet another place, you know. And that's something that I think we all share, that solidarity to say, which of our sisters needs the platform that maybe I don't need anymore, or she doesn't need as much as this other person needs. And I think that it's really hard for you. I mean, I didn't want to be in your shoes. I don't know if you've gotten any hate mail from people asking why you left them out. Why are they not in it? You know, because at the end of the day, an anthology editor only has so many pages. And so what you're sharing with us right now is the decision-making process, right? The prioritizing and the values that go into a selection, so that when a reader says, okay, why are these the ones that I'm supposed to read? Why not others? They understand that it's just a selection in a moment in time, trying to do the best you can to give platform. I don't know if I'm reading you correctly, but that's what I felt when I read your preface, and, you know, and saw how you had selected and who you'd been able to get in there.
Yeah, I mean, anthologies are a lot more difficult than people really, because there are so many exquisite writers, and I think, we've talked about this for many months now. We're living a renaissance. Latin American women writers are, in wherever we are, we're living a renaissance. And so there's such good writing, contemporary writing. And so it was a decision, like contemporary voices versus ancestor voices, and trying to create this and to show that we all have a tradition. We all have different traditions. There are ancestors who have inspired us. But to the point of Isabel, I did ask Isabel, and unfortunately she was working on her new novel, but I do think that Isabel would have ceded her space. But I want to mention that and we share this mentor, Esmeralda Santiago, was the first writer that I reached out to. She has been an inspiration to me as a Boricua. And I love her memoirs, I love her novels, I love her soul, I love her heart. And I reached out to her, and she said to me, she was the first writer that I reached out to when I began the process of curating this anthology. And she said to me, bueno, I'll participate she said, if you promise, she says, to include many fresh new voices. In fact, she almost didn't give me her text. I had to be like, come on, because she wanted to give the space to younger voices. But in the end, she understood that I really needed to show the tradition, the legacy that all of us, right, as Puerto Rican women, have, like the ancestors and the women who came before us, like Nicolás Amor, for instance, who is the first Puerto Rican woman to have to publish with a major publisher in the United States in English. And so yeah, it was a challenge, but it was a beautiful challenge, right? It was one of those, like, oh my goodness, are you kidding me?
I have to share with you an opinion that a reader that I trust very much, Maria Isabel, a friend of mine who is an aspiring writer, but a very experienced reader. She reads out of news, she does all. And she said to me, don't take this the wrong way, but the book is a woman. And I was like, what do you mean the book is a woman? She says, the book is a woman. There are all these moods. And I got all like, are you saying women are moody? Like, what's going on here? I was not having it. And she says, no. I mean, there is a mood for every, there is a tone and ambience. You feel like instead of reading a book, you're reading a woman with all the facets and all the histories that entails and all the things. And I said, I have to ask Sandra how she came up with the idea of the moons. The book, for those of you who may already have your copies, for you listening, it's divided in moons. And I always thought, how did she divide them? What did each moon mean for her? How did you interpret, and what did you base it on? Because I know you like research. So I knew that you had, there was a reason for how you arranged everything.
There
Can you
was absolute intentionality in everything I did. And some of it was also just absolute magic. So I was in Boriquen, popularly known by its colonized name, Puerto Rico, in Luquillo. And I was, working on the manuscript. It was, I wanted to be in El Caribe when I finished the anthology. It was like this desire. So in April, 2 years ago, I was in Luquillo, and I remember, the translator. The other thing I want to talk about is this book is, I think, a translator's literary masterpiece, because there's almost 24 languages. We have ancestor mother tongues. We have Spanish, Portuguese, English. We have so many different languages, and so these writings just traveled right through all these portals to hit us in English, right? And then the intentionality also was to have the indigenous languages to be included next to the English translation, because I wanted a tangible feel for the writing systems of these women. But anyway, so the moons. So I was in Luquillo, and I was talking to Lawrence Chamel. Do you know Lawrence?
Of course, he's a great translator.
He is a prolific translator. And, I didn't necessarily go after males to be part of this book. But if a writer, has her favorite translator, I'm going to honor that, because that translator is a champion of this writer. And so Yolanda Arroyo Pizarro, an incredible Afro-Boricua poet and novelist, she connected me to Lawrence, and I'm on the phone with Lawrence, and Lawrence and I, we became fast friends. He's just so incredibly well read, and he's a translator's. He's an editor's, and he's also edited about 50 anthologies. And so we're in conversation, and I was like, oh my God, I have 140 women, and I have to figure out how I'm going to divide them. And I was like, I think it would be boring to do it by era. I think it would be boring. I knew that time. I wanted to play with time. I wanted to be in conversation, because I'm in conversation with like a 16th century nun, a 19th century poet, a 21st century journalist. So I was already time traveling, and I wanted the same experience for the reader, right? The different moods, the different moods that your friend really picked up on. These are, these are women who are feeling the historical time of their time, who are feeling their womanness, who are feeling their matriarchal power. So I wanted all of that. And so he says, pero tiene que ser la luna. And I was like, la luna. And then I remembered, but la luna, but I remembered Luis. He's an indigenous man from Vieques who was helping me in my new home in Luquillo. And he said to me, so you're rematriating to your motherlands? Because for the last 10 years, I've been rerouting myself in a land that I left as a young girl. And I said, yeah. And he says, do you know the language of the moon? I'm like, what? Do I know the language of the moon? And of course, immigration and colonization has really cut those ties. But I started to think, bueno, my ancestors, my grandfather, my uncles, my cousins, they would never go out and fish unless they knew the status of the moon. They knew that in a full moon, there were certain fish that you can fish or not fish. They knew in a new moon, a wrong fish could poison you, Right. And I started thinking, of course, and then Luna Menguante, and I started thinking about when we planted, when we harvested, there are trees that in our world, there are trees that bleed during the full moon or new moon. That there's all of these ways in which the moon is in constant conversation with humans and with nature and with the ocean, and we're 73% water. So, and women have a very ancient connection to La Luna. So, I just started kind of thinking about it, meditating. And then at the same time, in the Maya tradition, there's a calendar that's been in existence and used for 26,000 years. It's been clocking 26,000 years, one of their many calendars. And I was like, holy shit, 26,000 years. And so in Maya communities, there's usually one person that's a timekeeper. And I reached out to one of the Maya poets, and I asked her if she could put me in touch with somebody who can talk to me about time and the moon and celestial energies. And actually, I think she's 141 woman, because I also mentioned her in the introduction, Nana Maria Kurichukukwe. I can't even pronounce, butchering her name. So she explained to me that in the Maya calendar, one of them, there's a 13-day week. 13 is the holiest number. It's another word for God. There's 13 moons in the year. So 13 became very resonant with me. And then I started to do more research on the number 13 and learn that human beings have 12 orifices, 12 huecos, right? The eyes, the nose, the mouth, the ears. And the women have 13. And our 13th orifice is the womb. So we are the most perfect being. So I was like, of course, it has to be 13 and 13 moons, 13 holy moons of the year. And then we started talking about the energies of different days of the week. So I think we might be in energy number. I was with Rigoberta Menchú last week, and it was October 5th. So, and it was on day 4. So if we add like, I don't know, what's 10 days. So we might be in like day number 2 again. But each day has an energy. And this is the thing that modern day humans who have been colonized don't understand. Whether you appreciate it, know it, understand it, comprehend it or not, the moon is touching you, affecting you every single day. Every time the sun is touching you and giving you energy at different times of the day. You may not be aware of it, but it is happening. And so each of these moons has a different energy. Each of the days has a different energy. And so I started to kind of meditate on that. And so that's what you have in the book, the 13 moons with the different energies. And then I was thinking about, I want to stop talking about me. I want to talk about you, girl.
Oh, I have more. I actually want to talk about the people listening to us now.
Okay, but hold on, because you're in the sinuous moon, and this lunar energy corresponds to the serpent's energy. The serpent's energy, right? This is the energy. This is a very powerful energy, Anja, which is the energy of Mother Earth. And when I think about your piece, when I think about Lucky, I think about this protective mother, and I get goosebumps talking about your piece. And I want to talk about why you chose. You could have written an exclusive piece, as some of the women did. You could have chosen, there are many different ways you could have chosen to go, but you were very specific with this piece. And I want to talk about it because it's a very powerful piece. It makes you angry, it makes you cry, but it makes you happy that these women have been written about, and they have not been forgotten.
Yeah.
So tell me about your contribution.
I will absolutely talk about that. I do want you to think about, after I tell you about this story, I want to talk with you about how you envision the people who read the book will be changed. I can see that you've been changed because I talked to you at the beginning of this, and I'm talking to you now. And it's been 2 years, right? Our relationship, yours and mine, has now spanned years. And I can see the difference. I can see the depth and just the marks everywhere, just happy marks that the book has left all over you. And I'm wondering, what a reader can expect. So I'll talk about this story. So my story in the anthology is called Lucky, as Sandra said. And it's a very short piece because it can't be long. It's triggering. I don't know if you people listening to us remember the story of 3 girls who had been abducted in Ohio. And I don't want to say the name of the perpetrator because I don't want to give him life. Yeah. But I was a producer, like Sandra. Sandra and I both share that we produced. And my day job used to be producing for television and film. And I used to produce a show called Desaparecidos. And it was about, people who disappeared, obviously. And my first show, the first show of that season, was with a woman whose daughter had disappeared on the way home from school. And when I talked to her, when I interviewed her, she was so sure. She was so calm, but also so sure that her daughter was alive and that she was there. And she kept, for years, that woman had been walking from the school to her house, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. People would tell her, no, by now, what people tell you after a while. And she refused to believe it. And I remember interviewing her and thinking to myself that her daughter was dead, but not wanting to tell her, obviously wanting to preserve that faith in her. But she was almost like she knew what I was thinking. And she had compassion for me thinking that. And
Wow.
she was sure that I understood that she believed it. And that, she wasn't crazy. She wasn't delusional. It wasn't about hope. She felt it. She felt her daughter's energy. She knew she was alive and she was going to find her. And lo and behold, years passed, many years, unfortunately, passed, and her daughter was found. The three women were rescued, and I want to say rescued, but were they really, right? Their bodies were rescued, and I'm sure to this day they're alive and they are dealing with all the aftermath of the violence of such a prolonged situation. And se me paran los pelos because of what we're living right now in the world, as you know. And so I remember seeing them being interviewed after being saved, and how people would ask them questions and then not let them answer. Like jump in with, well-meaning, right? Like with support and, telling them how brave they were and what heroes they were for surviving. And their faces to me, and I just remember feeling, and I don't know, I think as humans, we sometimes feel like we channel other people. You see somebody's face and you feel, you have words for what they're thinking, right? My husband and I have this thing where he tells me, don't think so loud, please, because he'll look at my face and he knows people know what I'm thinking. It's when I have these side-eye faces, he goes like, stop thinking so loud, right? but we all think loud.
Yeah.
And communicate sometimes without speaking. And so I go into into a classroom with my la maestra de mi vida, Nancy Safris, who's since passed, unfortunately, as well. And she said, write something in plural third person. Figure out what you can say. It has to be big enough, and at the same time, it has to be intimate enough. You have to be inside, but you also have to understand the bigness of what's happening outside. And you had 3 pages, 4 pages to do it. And that out of that exercise came that story of these women's voices and how, they didn't want you to say they were lucky. They weren't lucky, like how dare we call them lucky? And yet they couldn't say it for themselves because their voices are still down there in that basement, where they were trapped. And so that's where that piece came by. The woman who's kind of leading the lead narrator is Gina de Jesus, which was the daughter of the woman. She's still alive and, surviving in the world. The daughter of the woman that I had interviewed so many years before.
Amazing. It's harrowing, it's beautifully written. And we understand these women a lot more thanks to your writing.
Thank you.
And they, people will read this and want to know more, and want to know more about your work as well. It's very powerful piece of writing, and I really appreciate that that you're in it. And also it struck me as I was reading it that there was a protective element in the way that you went about writing this, which is why you ended up in the sinuous moon and the energy of the Mother Earth. Like I felt you mothered them in a really spiritual way, in a literary way. It was really sweet.
I'm really happy you say that, because for a long time I couldn't write about these things. I have a history of violence, in my family and all of that. And for a long time, people would say, "Oh, you write smart chick lit." And I would say, no, what is that? Smart chiclet. What is that redundancy? But I realized later what they were trying to say. They were trying to say that I didn't go into these really harrowing, things because I was still not strong enough.
Mm.
But started writing things like this, and I wrote this piece. I was also mothering the reader. I was trying to be careful about how I said certain things, about kind of warning them that something really bad is coming before it comes so that they could prepare.
Yeah.
Because I remember being stabbed by stories because I wasn't ready. I would get very, very angry at the author. It's like, why? Why do they have to tell me this? I don't want to, right?
Right.
And I realized that it was because I wasn't ready and I had not been warned
Yeah.
that it's coming.
Yeah.
And so it caught me completely unaware and triggered me for days, right? Because there is violence in the world and we're triggered constantly if you're a victim of violence. And even if you haven't been, there's socialized violence that we're living through everything. And so I was mothering them, and I was mothering that reader, especially that female reader that I didn't know, but that I could imagine being able to read it and to get the good out of it, to get the positive part out of it without being, hurt.
It was brilliant. It was really brilliant. And
Yeah. It's incredible that you thought of that because I'd never articulated like this. Do you want to talk about how not just this story, but obviously all these other stories will, how you hope or how it will change the people listening to us right now?
oh, it's been really, this because as an author, you work on the book, you work on the anthology, and then it's out in the world and it becomes something else. It is no longer yours. This is now, every reader has ownership to the anthology and to their thoughts and their feelings about it. Excuse me. What I have been experiencing, which has been really lovely, I've been visiting classes. There are some academics who are already teaching the anthology. And last week, I mentioned earlier, I was in San Antonio and I met 4 classes. Gabriel Saxton Ruiz is a literary translator and an academic, a professor out of the University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio, and he's teaching it. And they're going to do an exercise where they have to choose one writer and write about the writer. And they love all the writers so much, they're having a hard time deciding
Oh
who
my
they're going to
God.
write on. And, there's a woman who's now a Daina Chaviano groupie. I mean, she just loves Daina Chaviano, Miami-based Cubana who writes fantasy. And it's been really cool. There's another one who's absolutely in love with Cristina Rivera Garza, of course. There's like, and it's like, I don't know who to choose. And so that's the exciting part, to see young people engaged with the texts and engaged with the women. How do I want them to change? Everybody is going to come to the book and they're in specific moments in their lives. The students are in a specific moment, the adult readers are in a different space. For me is this idea that the women in this book should be studied, should be read more deeply and more closely, because they have very powerful things to say. I want a reader to understand the brilliance that exists in the Latine world of women. There's, I've been saying this because it's so true, that to fully understand the world, you have to understand it through the lens of the women. And so if you really want to understand Latin America and the Caribbean, you read this anthology and you'll understand it a little bit more deeply. And so the other thing I want to say, Anjanette, is, one of my mentors, Toni Morrison, wrote 11 novels that told the history of America, the 200-year-old history of America, in 11 novels. My attempt with this anthology was to tell the history of America Latina in one anthology. So that was also a very intentional conceit. I studied history. I'm a history major. And And the history that I was taught was not the history that I experienced in Puerto Rico, right? And so I wanted that. I want readers to understand the history of this region more intimately and more deeply, and through the lens of women.
How beautiful, you know, and I caught everything else. And I saw the broadness of all the stories, and I didn't catch that. How wonderful to understand that. I think now I'm going to look at it in yet another way.
I also, do we have time? I also want to talk to you about, you were a participant, you were a contributor, but now you're with all of these women. How does it feel to be in this gathering with all of these women who are like your sisters, the ancestors? I'm just wondering how it's landing on the contributors.
It feels crazy. I look at it and I look at these names next to mine, and I'm saying, Sandra must have been up for rocker that day. She wasn't thinking straight when she included me next to these people. But I'll tell you this, yesterday, my very best friend, who is a huge reader, Migdalia Figueroa, she says, I don't know if to be more angry at you or at me. You've been talking about this book, and I know, and I got it, but I hadn't had a chance to read it, and I didn't understand what you were so excited about. Like, I know, it's a book, but I am now seeing this. And to her, it was a big thing, to the point that she would apologize. She said, I'm so sorry. I didn't congratulate you correctly. I didn't understand what the book is in the scope of Latin American letters, what it means, in the history of in the female history, in the history of letters, in the history of our region, in the history of Puerto Rico, like all these meanings. I listened to you talk about being in the book and being happy. I didn't understand what you were saying. So I think that that sort of, I get it now. I'm just excited, but you are seeing it from the outside.
Yeah.
And realizing what a big feat it was that this got edited, published, and it's out there in the world.
Yeah. And the Spanish language edition is out in November, which feels like a completely different book. Raquel Salas Rivera did such a magnificent job. And then there's also the Portuguese translators and the Indigenous translators. So, we're the French translators. So some of these women did, wrote in different languages, and all that had to be translated to the Spanish from different languages.
And while Miriam comes on, I want to mention, for people who may not realize it, when they're one of the things Sandra did that I was surprised, and I thought, I wish I had thought of that, was that you don't go all, I'm going to find the most literary voices. No, you went for storytellers, I think, for people who had something to say. So you have people that we don't normally think of as writers. We think of them as journalists. We think of them as activists. We think of them as teachers. We think of them as actresses or songstresses. So for those of you out there, it's a different kind of anthology, in that it's not, it is a literary anthology, but it's not necessarily an anthology of written literature. It's more an anthology of stories, of women's stories throughout this region. That's how I see it. And it also made me think of story in a much broader way, right? A speech is a story, song story.
Of course. I mean, come on, songstresses never get the credit, right? I think it was Kendrick Lamar who won a Pulitzer, and also Bob Dylan, who won, I don't know if he won whatever, the Nobel, the Pulitzer, but they won a writing. So we don't think of songwriters, singer-songwriters in the same way as we think of novelists. And so I wanted to, it's a literary anthology, and I wanted to air out and redefine who gets to be in the canon. I'm canonizing women. I'm canonizing the oral literature. I mean, I opened the book. If this is a very clear statement of where my thinking was. I opened the book with a chant by a Mazatec indigenous woman from Oaxaca, Mexico. And she did not speak or write her indigenous language or Spanish, because she's in Mexico, in the same way that Homer, right, the illiterate author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, is praised as a masterful, literary, iconic, author. I'm also raising the vibration of Maria Sabina, who people may not know is one of the greatest voices of the region in the 20th century, a literary voice steeped in ancient oral literary tradition. So,
Exactly.
so yeah.
For everyone.
What can American Latinos do to help the new immigrants from Latin America? Well, I think you have to vote out of office people who hate them. That would be my first piece of advice, like gather, organize, and elect officials that, create policies with humanity. So that would be my first piece of advice. I'm an immigrant, and I think that, I use that word very intentionally. Puerto Rico is a nation, a sovereign, Borique is a sovereign nation. We are a nation under occupation, like Palestine, right? Like Guam, like the Virgin Islands. The military came in, the US military came in 1898 and killed a bunch of people and overpowered us. And so I came to this country as an immigrant. I had the immigrant experience, not speaking the language. English is my second language. And so I think we need to have more compassion for immigrants who are leaving their countries, not because they want to, There's climate change and economic devastation and fascist regimes. So they're seeking shelter in a place that plummets their lands, because a lot of American corporations are in Latin America extracting. I mean, next time you eat a banana, right? Next time you have a cup of coffee, ask yourself, where is this coffee coming from? Where is this banana being harvested? And where is this fruit being harvested? And more than likely, it's going to be by immigrant hands or indigenous hands of the Americas. And who owns these lands? How are these lands purchased, taken? These are questions that we must ask ourselves. The whys are really important. How do we help Latin American immigrants? Well, know the stories of why they're here and have some freaking compassion, right? And elect politicians or run for office if you're so interested in the topic, and make sure that laws are passed that are more humane. What do you think, Anjanette?
I agree with what you're saying. I mean, we always have to ask the why, right? The history behind things. But even less than that, I think already that is like a basic bar, what you just said, right? But even more basic than that, at least let's not support people who say immigrants poison the blood of anything, right? That reminds me so much of the Second World War and what brought to it. Because I mean, nobody poisons the blood of anything. We're not pure anything. Humans are not pure anything. And so at the very least, regardless of what we think or what people may think, economically, about other policies, I think the point that you make of making sure that we're humane, right? That we act first as humans, important. I think also reading. When you read people, you understand them better. And I think your mind is stronger to decide what you think. So that nobody manipulates you, nobody, not one side, not the other, because you've read the histories, you've read people's points of view, and you can make an informed decision, you can make a smart decision, and you can make a human decision.
Yeah.
It was one of the questions that I had for you, Sandra, how you manage the political. I mean, we're all political, right, in some way. And at some points when you're dealing with so many points of view, so many women, we're by no means all thinking the same. Far from it. I was going to ask you how you manage that, and if you had an intention for the political and the anthology.
Well, I mean, it turns out that many of the women here, for instance, the Dolores Ventimilla was part of the bourgeois class in Ecuador in the 19th century, and she was a young poet. And she was a young poet. Actually, it was Carmen Bollosa who said, you might want to read her work. And she wrote it's I forget what moon it's under, but she wrote an anti-capital punishment manifesto. And she got sick and tired of seeing the powers that be in Ecuador, the colonizers, lynch Indigenous men and women for no good reason other than stealing their lands. And so she wrote an anti-capitalist manifesto, and I think a month later she was found dead. Supposedly she drank cyanide. There was a harassment campaign by the highest clergy of the land, and then she was dead. And so the politics of the church during those days, women went through a lot. I also have Sor Juana de la Cruz, who went through so much. And I really encourage readers to read the nuns of those times, because nuns wrote under deep oppression, right? And they left us clues as to what was happening at the time. So what was I wasn't going to include in the anthology writers who were praising, colonizers. That was not going to make it. In many ways, these are women who are interested in tearing down the patriarchy. And the patriarchy came in 1493 into our land, and in 1492 on those ships, because we are, in the Americas is a matriarchal system, and that's where the women and the men have equal rights, and the women are the ones in charge of the community. And so I was very clear that this was an anthology in the spirit of the matriarchy, not in the spirit of the patriarchy. So, I don't know if that's political or, or what.
No. It is the broader sense, which I think is the right sense for a work of this importance, right? Not in the this party of that party, but in the sense of the bigger history, historical decisions. Miriam, is there a question? If not, I have a few more minutes, and I'm going to put this woman.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Oh, perfect. Yes, I can now.
We have a couple questions. First question from Lennon. What is one of your best experiences you had while working this anthology?
Oh, I love that question. There are so many beautiful experiences. Now remember, ancestors came knocking on my door. If I really wanted a writer, I would I would ask them, do you want to be here? Like, open the doors for me. And, shit happened where doors and portals were open. And I was about to close the anthology. The manuscript was due. And I really wanted more Cuban writers, and it was very difficult to contact las mujeres en Cuba because of the embargo. It was challenging. And so a couple of Cubanas had to drop out because, of course, anthologies, which we haven't talked about, are incredibly tricky because you need permissions. And once a writer is no longer physically with us, some of those estates are in shambles. And sometimes it's families don't understand anthologies.
There's no one who asks permission too.
Yes, there's no one. You can't find them. And then if you find them, they're like, what? An anthology? What? And they think like, oh my God, it's going to make millions of dollars. Anthologies don't sell. I hope this one breaks, the trend and, and sells, millions of copies. But yeah, it was a moment where I wanted to find an Afro. I didn't know what I wanted to find. She came to me, and her name is Mari Grueso Romero, and she's an Afro-Colombiana from Buenaventura, the Pacific coast of Colombia. And I read, thank God, and thank the goddess for technology, because I found her through Facebook and social media. I actually found her daughter. Her daughter communicated with her, and finally, we're in conversation, and I explained to her, I tried to do as many Zoom meetings as I could with the authors, because I wanted to explain to them, this is what I'm doing. I wanted them to understand, like, what I was on, the high that I was on. And so she said yes. And then she said to me, te puedo leer algunos poemas. And so I'm like, would you? And so I was serenaded. I was sung to. Women, at all hours of the day would call and, leave me messages with their poems and their stories. So, but Mari Grueso was one of the last women to say yes. And yeah, that was a really beautiful moment. There was another moment with Cecilia Vicuña, and Cecilia is, just an exquisite poet and artist, and she had just won the Lion Award, which is an award given to a visual artist. But Cecilia starts with the word, and then the visual comes. So she's a visual poet, which is a whole other situation that's so beautiful. And I reached out, I had a dream. And in the dream, what I saw was Cecilia Vicuña's name in golden letters. Now, I don't know Cecilia Vicuña, but I knew that I needed to have Cecilia Vicuña in the book. So I immediately start searching Facebook to see who's connected to Cecilia, who can connect me to Cecilia. And I did find some, mutual friends who knew Cecilia, who are Chilenos and Chilenas. And they gave me old email addresses, but then something really magical happened with Cecilia. I reached out to her, I guess the artistic manager, some British person, and they were like, absolutely not. She's not interested. Nope, she's busy, because she was busy preparing her art for this, the Venice Biennale. And then I found Rosa Alcalá, her translator. I love the translators. I found Rosa. Rosa connected me to Cecilia. I reached out to Cecilia, and she was on a plane on her way to Italia, Venice. And she said, absolutely, yes, I'm going to be with my sisters. Yes. And then she sent me a number of poems. And one of the poems is from one of her first collections that was banned in Chile. So this banning that's taking place in Florida and across the United States has been something that Latinas, the women of the Americas, have had to deal with since the conquistadores came. Remember, the Jesuits burnt thousands of books, Mayan books, right? The codexes, there's only 4 that exist right now. They burnt them because they were diabolical. And so we know that banning has been, something that's been taking place for centuries. But Cecilia's golden letters, I was like, wow, amazing.
Thank you to the person who asked that question, because I would not have known this story otherwise. Thank you so much.
What influenced your selection of Julia de Burgos's letters in the anthology? How did you determine whether to include personal letters versus essays versus newspaper articles, etc.?
I love that question. It's such a good question. Letters are also literary, right? They're part of the literary genre. And I came across a book called Cartas a Consuelo, which is a collection of letters that Julia de Burgos wrote to her sister. Julia is also one of 13 children. See, 13 kept coming up. 13 kept coming up in the book. Julia de Burgos is the oldest of 13 children, and at 19, she had already graduated from college, and then she went to Cuba, and she was in Cuba for a period of time, and she wrote letters to her sister for, I think it was like a 10-year period. And when I read these letters, I just fell in love with the intimacy of the letters. Here we find Julia de Burgos talking to her sister about wanting pictures of her nieces and nephews, asking how the families are, encouraging her sister to come to Cuba and study laws, and they could become lawyers together. And she said, and guess who came to visit? Pablo Neruda came, and he came to our house, and guess what? I made him an asopao, And so I was like, we know her as the poet. Let's know her more intimately. And also Gabriela Mistral, there's a beautiful collection of letters, of love letters to Doris Dana, her beloved. And remember, Gabriela Mistral lived and died in the closet. And so it was difficult choosing what letter to include, because they were very powerful and different parts of her personality that I wanted to include. And so how did I choose? I think that the essays and the letters and the pieces of writing chose me. They chose me. I read, and how could I not include this intimate letter, or this speech by Rita Laura Segato? We talked about the foremost feminist intellectual in the region, in Latin America, And I had to, she's just exquisite. I had to include the speech that rocked the literary world a couple of years ago, where she took on the industry, the publishing industry, that makes it so difficult, right? The imperialistic publishing industry that makes it so difficult for us to find books by Latin America, like Uruguayan writer can't really find books by Argentinian writers because the distribution channels are so messed up. Like Puerto Rican writers are not really found in like Chile. Like how difficult is that? It's because a lot of these corporations own the publishing companies, and you know, those bridges are not there. And so she took on the industry, and it was a really beautiful and powerful. She even took on Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I mean, that's like huge. She took on his gaze, the master gaze that he was, you know, he was still under the master gaze's spell, and she was not going to have it. She was not going to have it. And so in many ways, the writings also chose me. The writings also chose me. They were too powerful to ignore. Do you have a question, Miriam?
I don't really have a question. I mean, you know, I identify as a Latina myself, and I just find it very interesting, everything that you've been talking about. And I feel like I need to get more in touch with my ancestors.
Yes.
And that ancestral language. Because again, I'm an immigrant myself, so leaving my country, that was not my choice. I was a child. And I wish that I spoke better Spanish. I wish I knew more about my culture and the history of where I come from. I'm originally from Mexico. But, you know, arriving here so young, I just didn't have that opportunity. So sometimes I definitely do lament that, you know, I didn't really have that choice. But yeah, I guess it's up to me to you know, do my research and learn.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah, well, read the anthology. There's a lot of amazing, powerful Mexicanas, Chicanas, Tejanas, Mexicanas. There's a, you know, beautiful tradition in Mexico, literary tradition, oral and written. So you come from a great tradition.
Yes, thank you. Well, again, ladies, I apologize. My video is not working, unfortunately. But I just want to thank you, Sandra and Anjanette, for this wonderful conversation. You are both two powerful Latina women, and really appreciate the conversation and this book. And hopefully, you know, we can dive deeper into our ancestors.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who listened, and thanks to everybody who asked a question. The questions were wonderful. We love doing this. I love being in conversation with you, Sandra, and
me too.
Feeling the energy of everybody as we were talking about things that are not always easy to talk about, right? They get a little difficult and get a little bit feisty, because we're feisty. But thank you so much, all of you, for receiving us, for receiving what we had to give. And I hope you have the best night. I'll see you soon, my sister, in November at the Miami Book Fair, okay?
Yes, that's going to be fire. Elizabeth and Daina and Esmeralda. It's going to be you and me in one freaking room.
We'll do some damage.
People, if you don't have any plans to go to the Miami Book Festival, go. It's going to be fire. Thank you to the Gwinnett Public Library for hosting us. I hope you start a book club and conversations. I wish everybody a good night. Thank you to the ones, the brave ones who asked questions. They were really provocative and important questions.
They were.
It's a good time.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches. Bye.
Bye.